Welcome back to The Backmarkers, the F1 podcast for new fans by new fans. My name is Myke Hurley, and I am joined by my co-host, Austin Evans. Hi, Austin.
Mike, we have picked such a great season to start this show. It is all popping off.
It's the best. Austin Evans hit us with the recap of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, the second race of the 2022 season.
So top line, the results were Max Verstappen wins in a nail-biting finish right over Charles Leclerc. We also had Carlos coming in for a 2-3 coming in on the Ferrari side. And then going down the rest of the order, we had Checo coming in at 4th. We had George Russell for Mercedes in 5th. Esteban Ocon in 6th. Lando Norris, surprisingly, got all the way up to 7th. And then rounding out the top 10, we have Pierre Gasly, Magnussen, and Lewis Hamilton. So, a lot happened in the race. A bunch of cars just immediately stopped working at one point. I think there was 2 cars broken in the pit lane entrance at one point, and the final tally was only 12 cars finished the race, which most of them were just broken, not actually crashed, although we had some of those too. It was eventful.
Yep. And as of recording right now, there is a possibility of some potential penalties. We're going to keep an eye on that throughout the race, which actually is a good point of thank you to everybody for tuning in for our second episode. We got tons of kind and encouraging words about the show. So many people excited that we're doing this. I think as excited as we are to be doing this, which is awesome. We've done a few things. If you are watching the live video or the video on demand, don't forget there is a video version of this show. If you are just listening to the audio, you can find it on our YouTube channel. I've made some tweaks to the graphics. And that is a work in progress because the issue is I can make the graphics really look good, or I can do the graphics quickly because we're trying to go live as soon as we can after the race. I'm not sure which is going to be the right way to do things. We're working it out. But I think we have done some stuff to make the graphics clearer for teams and stuff like that. So hopefully you'll enjoy those. And also, we're going to also make sure that in future we're paying more attention to our live stream chat, because when we are streaming live, there is a chat that we can read, and also because it can help us lean on some things for some more information. Like maybe if we want to lead into some follow-up, something that was kind of happening a little bit after the race, and we found out more after. Can you tell the Backmarkers audience who may have missed out, Austin, what happened to the Red Bulls last week?
So last week was the very first race, not only of the season, but of these brand new vehicles. And because of that, there were some real reliability issues pretty much entirely on the Red Bull powertrain side of things. So about 10 laps or so before the end of the race, Pierre Gasly's car just caught on fire, which, happens sometimes, I guess. But then in the last couple of laps, both Max as well as Checo on the Red Bull side had race-ending issues. Max actually ended up seeming like after the race, and they kind of broke it down, he had a few things going on where I think they had broken his track rod or something during a pit stop, and then he ended up having a fuel pump / delivery issue. They were still a little bit cagey on exactly what happened.
I heard something
and a similar
about
fuel issue.
A vacuum, because they're using, this is something I didn't know until after the race last time, that they're actually using slightly different fuel. It's one of the more less known, it seems parts of the regulation, because it's maybe not as exciting, but it is more, I think it's 10% is renewable fuel. It's ethanol fuel. And apparently because of this, there is a new fuel pump. And apparently there was an issue with the vacuum at the fuel pump because Red Bull hadn't fully tested this, and which was why all of the Red Bull cars seemed to struggle last time. And the fun thing going into today's race was, I don't know if you caught it beforehand, but they were a little bit oh, we haven't actually, we don't know. Because they couldn't have done the full test required, right? A full race test, so... It seems like it seems like whatever changes they were able to make, they made them.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was interesting was, obviously, both Red Bull cars crossed the finish line and didn't, sputter out or something. But we also had a lot more unreliability with the rest of the field, right? So, like we were saying earlier, there was a point, I think 20 laps or so to go, where I think 2-3 cars all broke simultaneously. It was Valtteri Bottas. It was Danny Rick. It was, I'm going to forget who else was it.
So
there were 3 or 4
Daniel
cars.
Ricciardo and Fernando Alonso.
Yep.
They both...
Oh, Alonso.
They both cut out. Bottas was already in the pits and they retired him.
Right, and I still actually never heard. I feel like the TV coverage completely avoided what actually happened to Valtteri there, which sucked because he was having a really nice little race there.
Yep.
But it was chaos. But then, of course, at the end, that was when it really all popped off.
Man,
But I guess before we go,
I just say on Alonso, I felt so bad for him. Did you catch the moment when he hit his helmet? Yeah, like me and Adina at the same time point, we went, oh, like I felt so bad for him because he looked so sad walking away there, and he seemed so mad. But
I know, and it sucks because he had a great scrap earlier in the race
Mm-hmm.
with Ocon. They were going back and forth, I think, to the chagrin of Otmar over on their team principal side. It was like, stop racing with each other. There's everyone else out here.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a good scrap. But before we go into the full recap of the race, there was a very eventful weekend before the cars even hit the track this morning.
Yeah, so I don't think we're always going to talk about qualifying, right? Like it's not necessarily going to be something that is important, quote unquote important after the race, right? Because everything has played itself out. But this week was just wild. So we start with, was it in FP1?
It was, I believe, in between FP1 and FP2 or toward the beginning of FP2.
That there was
I believe.
An explosion close to the track, and I think it was an Aramco, which is both a sponsor of Formula One and Aston Martin. They're a gas company, like an oil company, right? And there was, due to the current ongoing war between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. I've had to try and learn a little bit about this week, which is something that, I'll be honest, like I wasn't particularly aware of, which I feel bad about now. But there was a missile attack from I think it's pronounced Houthi rebels in Yemen, because Saudi Arabia is... Basically, there's war going on, which is like a whole strange thing, because there's war going on in Ukraine, right? And Formula One were like, no Grand Prix for Russia. But there's war going on with Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and they're like, yeah, don't worry about it. And it's not good. It's not a good look.
It's really unfortunate. I feel like this year's also showing, while the racing has been great, that it is a tough time to run a worldwide championship with the way that things are right now. So there was a lot of drama that night. There was a very, I think it was like a 4-hour driver meeting where all the team principals got together and okay, you know what? Let's keep doing with the race. It'll be fine. Because keep in mind that this sort of missile landed, it was like 7 miles from the racetrack. Really quite close.
You could see it.
You could
on
absolutely
the racetrack.
see it.
You could see all the smoke. And they apparently the drivers could smell it.
Yeah. There's this clip of Max being like, I smell smoke. I'm not sure if it's me or someone else. And no one told him that was a missile attack. Obviously, it is unusual to have literal war outside of a racetrack. That's not what you usually think about when you think F1. And so while the team principals seemed like they were generally speaking on board with continuing the race, the Grand Prix Drivers Association, which is led by George Russell, but it's essentially all 20 of the drivers are in a association really to kind of help promote safety, but also kind of just to help promote a lot of other things. They all got together. They basically just sort of made an impromptu meeting that took hours and hours late into the night. Team principals were coming and going. The CEO of F1, it was a big deal. And it seemed like, even though since then they have, of course, decided to race and no one really was super clear on the details, a number of drivers seemed like they were not comfortable with the actual race continuing. However, and I don't want to get super into all the details, but it's a problematic thing to do races in certain countries, including Saudi Arabia, which has a lot of very specific restrictions. And there was also practical issues with if they tried to cancel the race. Well, guess what? Where's everyone going to go? You can't just get 20 extra planes to come and pick up everyone who's there. Yeah. So it seemed like the move was to continue the race. But with Saudi Arabia having a very long-term contract to continue into Formula One, I think it will be interesting to see, now that this race is over and everyone's going to go home, what happens to the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix in the future. Because there's a lot of money involved, but also there's a lot of issues with this particular venue when it comes to Formula One.
I'll say it, Saudi Arabia has a terrible track record of human rights abuses. So, you want to say it, I'll say it. I get, it's like we're just trying to have a Formula One podcast here, but here we are. But this is 2022, right? There's no way around it. You are right. Do I expect that they're going to continue racing in Saudi Arabia? Yes, I do. However, when they were there, they kind of can't leave the country very easily, pulling out and leaving. Like, there was a thing with the WWE wrestling a few years ago where they have a similar deal with Saudi Arabia, and there was some contract disputes about money, and they wouldn't let a bunch of the talent leave. So it is very complicated, but we're where we are. It was wild. A very strange backdrop for the session, but qualifying itself was really wild. So Lewis had a bunch of troubles, throwing him right back in 16th is where he qualified. Started from 15th because of Ricardo,
I believe,
right?
got the,
because of Ricardo's penalty. But of course, the big news was Mick Schumacher's crash, which was a real nasty crash.
That was tough. So last week, we had a lot of action, but it was generally speaking a really fun, entertaining race. And then to start out, so just for context, if you're a new Formula One fan, this is only the second time that Formula One has raced at this particular track in Saudi Arabia. It is a street circuit, which means that, and unlike a more purpose-built racetrack, there are concrete barriers everywhere. At most tracks, if you get a little sideways or off, there's gravel, there's tire barriers. There's a little bit of room for error. Saudi Arabia is one of the fastest tracks on the calendar. It has no room for error. It is incredibly exciting to watch, and it is a ridiculously fast track. But if you put a tire a few inches off somewhere, anywhere, you could easily go spearing into a wall at 170 miles an hour, which is exactly what Mick Schumacher did, to the point where his radio and everything cut out. So the TV feeds, because they didn't have any confirmation that he was okay, all cut away from it. And it was one of those very uncomfortable moments of, is he okay? You see the ambulance getting there, you see all this stuff, and there was no news for, it felt like a long time. I think it was ended up being like 10 minutes or something. But if you're watching qualifying yesterday, you will know that was a very scary thing to watch live.
Yeah, and then kind of as a combination of things. One, that when they picked up the car, the back end of the car broke away and fell apart. I've never seen a Formula One car split in half before. That was a wild image. Like, it was so badly damaged. So Haas was saying between Mick is okay. He seems absolutely completely fine. He was at the track today giving press interviews. But between the car being so damaged and them having so few parts available, Haas were worried that if Mick was to crash today, considering he also crashed in Jeddah last time, that they are worried that they would not have enough of a car to put together for Melbourne, which is the next race.
Yeah.
So there was a concern that they would not be able to actually put a race on at all, so they decided to just sit him out of this one. So
just fair enough. There's the cost cap. Haas is, traditionally one of the smaller teams. And especially this early in the season, you don't exactly have 5 spare cars just sitting in the garage you can sort of wheel out, right? So understandable. Also, even if they would have brought another car out for him, he's going to be starting from dead last. It would be unlikely, although I guess to be fair in a race like this, there potentially were points, but probably the right call. Not all things just being said. He might be fine, sort of physically, but after a big wreck like that, not the worst idea. Take a couple days off, kind of sort of set yourself for what will be a very exciting race, hopefully, which is in 2 weeks' time in Australia.
Yep.
But if all that wasn't enough to set the stage, then we had a 4-way shootout for pole won by none other than Sergio Perez, which I don't think anyone called going into this weekend.
No, and it was kind of funny because immediately after qualifying ended, Sky Sports here played a package of that they'd put together of Verstappen and Leclerc, and going back to the karting days, and it's kind of funny. Like, there's neither of these is pole, right? And obviously it ended up playing out fine for today, but it was kind of funny at the time. Sergio getting his first pole, which was fantastic for him.
After 215 races, which is wild to think about.
Which I will lead into. We're building up a bunch of great segments on this show, which I'm excited about. One thing I want to do, by the way, Austin, is over the next few weeks, I want to start coming up with some fun names for these segments. But for the moment, underperformer of the race, Myke Hurley is giving it to the aforementioned Sergio Perez. I was really hoping for more for Sergio today. It was an unfortunate situation for him. I do not think that this was Sergio's fault. He had a very poorly timed pit because he pit, then was it Latifi, right? Put the Williams into the wall, triggering a safety car, and then just a chain of pit stops. But I was expecting Sergio to win today because he also had a pretty, decent start. It wasn't a perfect start. He had a decent start, but I was at least expecting him to be on the podium today, and unfortunately he made neither happen, coming in fourth place.
Look, I am not going to agree with you that he was the underperformer of the race, but I will say that he was the unlucky person of the race, right? So he was leading. Ferrari kind of sort of faked them out. They're very clear, like, we're going with plan A, pit to overtake. And then, of course, they just left him to hang out to dry. And immediately he got completely screwed because there was the wreck. There was the safety car. Everyone else got a nice, clean, easy pit stop. And Checo came out in third/fourth because as he came out, Carlos was just coming out and they ended up giving the position back. It was a mess. I agree that Checo should have really gotten at least a podium today, but I'm actually going to give the underperformer of the race for me to Carlos. Now, this is a race, just like last week, where both Red Bull and Ferrari seem to be very evenly matched on pace, right? And yet again, even though all four cars were the same and Checo, had the lead and everything, it seems like things just weren't really clicking for Carlos. He did fine. He was respectable, but he was really just in no man's land the entire race. He was sort of by himself. He was kind of a little bit back and forth with Checo, but it was just, I feel like considering how well Max and Leclerc are doing right now, Carlos should be up in that fight, in my opinion. I feel like Carlos is that sort of same caliber of driver, but it seems like he's a little half step behind, much in the same way that Checo has, generally speaking, looked like he's a half step behind Max the last year and a half or so. So I'd like to see a little bit more from Carlos. I feel like he really should be able to get up there and mix it up. Hopefully, just needs a little bit of time to get on top of the car. But right now, it seems very clearly the Max and Charles show at the front at the moment.
Yeah, I was gonna call foul on you there. I was like, oh, but your podium didn't do that bad. And then I looked at the finishing times, and Sainz finished 8 seconds behind Leclerc. That's a big gap.
Especially because things were somewhat neutralized toward the end, as well as, Max and Charles lost a lot of time fighting as well. So if they were sort of more holding station at the front, I think the gap would have been even larger.
Yeah,
so
and Perez was 2.8 behind Sainz. So that's it's much closer, right? With all things considered. So it's an odd one. It's similarly like in some of these things we're breaking our own rules, but I guess we can make our own rules. But it's funny to say third and fourth being underperformers, but genuinely for both of them, I was expecting more, especially when, compared to last week's race, things were way more shaken up. If you look at the driver standings this week compared to last week, things are looking really, really different. So Charles is still up there at top and Carlos right behind. But now Max, coming up from no points, is now in at third. George Russell in at fourth, above Lewis Hamilton now because of the performance of this week. But then, we had a lot of people like Magnussen and Bottas were way higher and now way lower. And we're seeing people like Norris and Yuki now scoring points this week where they didn't last week. So kind of mixing up the order quite a bit. So, obviously things were going to change a lot between sessions 1 and 2, but they have changed a lot after session 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Some surprises here. I mean, I don't think it's any surprise to see that we were going to quickly see Ferrari and Red Bull kind of pull away. It doesn't really seem like anyone can challenge them at the moment.
Yeah.
Especially with Mercedes almost being worse this week than they were last week because they got incredibly lucky last race, right? With the Red Bull retirements and whatnot. This time seemed like a little bit more of where they were on raw pace, Lewis sort of notwithstanding, and they did fine. And George, again, had a very clean, by himself kind of race. But I think it's very, very obvious that unless something changes dramatically really quickly, they were going to see a two-way fight for the title this year, which is fine. But it's not the two cars I think a lot of people would have guessed going into the season.
Yeah, I mean, I will say personally, I think Mercedes did pretty good, all things considered, this week. I think George cementing himself in fourth place was honestly best case scenario, right? I think for Mercedes to score fourth this week was that was fifth. I should say fifth. I meant behind the top two teams was the best that they could have hoped for. I think. Because last week, I don't think they even looked like they could have held that. Like, I know it was where they ended up being, right? They ended up scoring in third and fourth. But I think this week, George was much more decidedly in that position of best of the rest than Mercedes were last week. And unfortunately, I think we would have seen Lewis right there behind George. But Lewis had an unfortunate situation. He was running real long. He was into lap 40-something, I think 45 maybe. There was a safety car. He would have gone in, a virtual safety car, would have gone into pit. That was when those 3 cars had stopped, but they'd stopped right at the pit lane. So he was not able to take advantage of what they were hoping. Honestly, if it was allowed, I think Lewis would have gone to the end on that hard tires.
He would have.
He was doing fine. That was one of my favorite moments. I'm actually gonna make this my personal favorite moment of the race because Lewis is talking to Bono on the radio, and he's approaching the pit, and they say he can't go in, and Lewis goes ah, and it was just the sound that he made. It was just like a really funny moment, like ah. He was just so upset at that one second, understandably, right? Because he would have been able to get in then and make the change that he wanted. Well, what unfortunately ended up happening was he had to take that change, his pit, immediately after things took off again and had lost some of the gap that he had. So if he would have been able to pit without that safety car, I don't think he would necessarily have come back so late because they would have just taken that moment when they could, maybe taken it right at the very end, put him on softs. I don't know what they would have done, but I think that Lewis scoring in the points, all things considered, was pretty good for him. Especially starting from where he did in qualifying, because, by the way, Lewis said that was his fault. He felt that qualifying was his fault. I don't know if you read about this, but he asked for some tweaks to be made for the car that he wanted, and they were bad. He made bad choices.
So I will say I still have very large question marks around Mercedes-powered vehicles. To be fair, Lando did all right this race, but I think a lot of this race was really a race of attrition. And when you have 12 cars finishing, you're going to get some sort of unusual points finishers. I'm not feeling super, super great about where they are. To be fair, there was unreliability that pretty much struck everyone. I mean, Yuki was out on the installation lap before they even kind of got to the grid, which was very unfortunate, especially because I think he entirely missed out on qualifying yesterday as well with some kind of issue that they clearly were unable to fix. So, look, these are brand new vehicles. This is a brand new sort of set of regulations. There are going to be unreliability issues, but what seems to be a little bit of a bigger issue than that is just a lack of speed. And it seems like the Mercedes-powered vehicles just don't have the speed. The works team is on top of it the most, as you would expect. But you look at McLaren, you look at especially at Racing Point. I'm sorry, not Racing Point, Aston Martin. I'm getting all my pink teams mixed up here.
Yeah, I like that you said Racing Point, which would have been Alpine, but you meant Aston Martin. This is like all over the place.
Dude, it's a crazy time.
It is hard. It's hard to pick. It's hard to pick Alpine out of the lineup right now. It is very difficult.
Yeah.
I'll give you that.
But, there were some other things that really did stand out to me throughout the race. So, look, I think we may have a little bit of a different opinion here. And while there are a lot of issues with this racetrack, as well as with where this race is happening, but you got to give it that this is one of the most thrilling racetracks that is on the calendar right now.
I don't like it.
It is nonstop action.
I don't like it. It really puts me on edge. I do not like watching cars on this track. It's too fast. I find a lot of the street circuits unnerving because they tend to be narrower, and I really don't like personally seeing the concrete blocks right at the side, and this one being specifically targeted and marketed to be the fastest street circuit, like that is an important thing for some reason. Like, I don't know why you need to, you know what I mean? Like, why design a track to be that specific thing? Is if you want a fast race, build a track, right? Like, Saudi money could do that. They've chosen, they want it as a street circuit for whatever reason. They want it in a certain part of the town. There are many ways you can construct a racetrack. Fastest street circuit is like, I don't know why. I know why you would want to build that. I know why they would want to build that so they can say they have it. I do not enjoy this course. I will say it is thrilling. The thrilling nature of it is definitely there. I don't like feeling so nervous during a race.
Yeah, look. I get it. And from a safety point of view, could be much, much better. But it does kind of give me a little bit of that sort of like almost, not a great comparison, but almost like the old like Nordschleife, like Nürburgring sort of feel of like ridiculously unsafe, way too crazy, shouldn't be happening. But it's like, you want to go and see them go out there and race. And obviously, if you get it wrong, there's huge sort of penalties. But on the flip side, a lot of purpose-built race courses have a lot of margin for error. Oh, you get out, you missed the chicane, whatever, it's fine. Guess what? You try to make a mistake here, that wall's going to bite you, which means that when you see these crazy qualifying laps like what we got from Checo yesterday, it means to me a lot more when if you push it 3 more inches, you're in the wall versus, a normal track. Oh, what's that white line? I'll just drive over it. Who cares? Like,
my
it's a little bit of a
favorite
different
kinds
feel.
of tracks are the ones with gravel, because you go in the gravel, you can't get out. And so like there's still no, but it's not like say the French Grand Prix or like the Circuit of Americas, right? Where like the runoff area is just more tarmac, it's just a different color, right? So you go off and you can come back on again. Where the gravel tracks, well, that's it. You're off, right? Like, we're not everywhere, but like there are certain corners. So that it has, I think, the same element of like, you've got to pay attention here. Like, there is no margin of error, but it doesn't result in a car snapping in half, right? Like, that's just my personal, because so it feels like there is still the thrill of risk, but the risk isn't to the drivers themselves. And like, and I'm not saying that you are wrong for feeling away. Like, this is just like a difference of opinion thing. I do not like the Corniche circuit. It just feels very uncomfortable to me.
Well, to be fair, it will probably not have a space on the grid, well, for many reasons, because not only is Saudi Arabia still, I believe, building a more purpose-built track that I believe is supposed to be coming in the next 2 or 3 years. This was originally designed as a little more of a temporary circuit,
not know
although
that's good to know.
Yeah, but also just, the fact that given how this weekend went, how much of a future that race really has.
It's a 15-year deal worth $1 billion. Like, I think F1's going to do everything they can to keep it on the calendar. I would like to see something different, because ultimately it did not seem like many of the drivers were very happy with that.
Of course.
With this weekend,
of course. I mean,
right?
Look, we're here to watch entertainment.
Yep.
No one's here to see a missile land a few miles outside the track. Like, there's no scenario in which that's just okay and normal.
And it's
fine.
not going to change, right? Like, this war has been going on for years. It's like it's for old tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and it's playing out there, and like there's so much going on with it. It's not like we're going to come back next year, it's going to be fine. And I think this was very clearly done for this exact reason, right? They took out the plant of like the storage facility of the sponsor of the race, right? Like on the race weekend, it's like, so that's not going to change. But yeah, there's no need to get back to that.
Yeah. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. But maybe getting a little ahead to some of the viewer questions in a little bit. There are some other races that seem to be joining the calendar soon. Las Vegas, maybe.
Yeah. I will say, like, this is very heavily rumored, but almost basically confirmed, right? Was it for next year, Las Vegas joining the calendar?
Yes.
Is there expectation? I guess at the moment it would fill Sochi's place, right? That just as like an amount to bring it back up to 23.
Yeah, I believe so. What's been rumored, and I believe, according to ESPN, which seems fairly reputable, it's confirmed to them, that we would be seeing it during the Thanksgiving sort of time. So in November of 2023,
Smart.
which would be really exciting. That's not too far away from when the Austin Grand Prix is. So you can imagine maybe it's like Austin, Mexico, and Vegas. They're even talking about potentially New York being another U.S. race, which seems a little bit aggressive.
I don't think.
I don't even know how they would make that work. That seems like more
impossible.
of a...
That's a stretch goal right
I
there.
agree.
Like, also, look, we do not need 4 American Grand Prix, all right? Chill out, okay? You've Americans have liked the sport for 18 months. Calm down. There's a lot of the rest of the world, right? Why don't we do 2 in the United Kingdom, right? Like, let's do one here. We'll do one up in Scotland. Like, we're going to have a great time, right? Like, come on. We just get one, and now you're like, we'll have 4, right? Like, let's go one at a time, all right? So,
Okay.
Las Vegas would be very high on my list of a place to do, because it will obviously be a street circuit, right? Because driving those cars down the strip would be amazing, right? So like,
Absolutely.
I am all into that, and it will just visibly look incredible, right? Like, again, logistically, I don't know how they make it work, but Las Vegas is all about logistics. Like, it is a logistics town, right? There's always some kind of event happening there. It would be an incredible place to do a Grand Prix.
Absolutely. I actually was in Las Vegas fairly recently, and they've done a lot just in the last couple of years because there's now an NFL team in town. So they've built a huge stadium on the other side of the freeway. It does seem like a place that I think personally I'd like to go to Vegas and hang out and watch the race. But I actually think it would have some real advantage if they can get the track right. Because let's not forget, there were F1 races in Vegas, I believe, in the early 80s, and it was like in a glorified parking lot. Like, it was absolutely terrible. I'd like to think that they can learn from their mistakes and actually build a really cool street circuit in Vegas. I will say, though, as someone who's driven a lot in Las Vegas, talk about a flat, boring area. They're going to have to do some real work to kind of build it up. And I have similar concerns about the Miami Grand Prix as well, as far as how they're going to be able to make these street circuits, which will obviously sell a ton of tickets, actually good places to race. But regardless, and we're a little on a tangent here, but if for a multitude of reasons the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix falls off.
The chat right now, every American in the chat is saying, but America's as big as Europe. Here's the thing. Europe has a long love and history with Formula One. This is my point, right? Like, give it a little time to breathe, okay? Like, what I'm trying to say is, yes, we're not talking about land mass. I'm talking about, like, history. We're not going to put the cart before the horse here. Because as well, we can't just keep forever adding races into the calendar, right? Like, you can't keep making, I know Formula One would probably love this. You can't just keep making the season bigger and bigger. So let's okay, we'll add Vegas in, great. Let's just chill before we add like another American Grand Prix into the calendar just because America loves Formula One now, okay? This is what I'm saying. Okay. It's not about size, it's about history, all right? This is a historic sport. We went for a long time without a Grand Prix in the UK, by the way. Like, a very long time. So, you know.
Look, Mike, I'm not going to argue with your history. Obviously, the UK and Formula One are very close, and it seems like it's really unfair that the United States now has a bunch of cool races, and y'all don't, and I'm sorry to hear that.
We have the one that everyone says, best and most important. I think that's what they say. I think Silverstone,
I don't think so.
No, I think they say best, most important. We'll find out in July. We'll find out. Someone will say it. One of the commentary team will say it because they're all English, so someone's going to say it.
I'm detecting a hint of bias here.
Look, I've already said, this show is all about my biases, and I'm owning them, and I don't care, right? It's like I can say, oh man, Mercedes are great this weekend, and you know what? In my heart, I mean it. But your reaction told me that maybe they weren't so much. I don't know. We'll find out.
Well, speaking of things that are going to be a little hard to agree on, how about our favorite back marker of the race? Considering that only 12 cars finished, we don't have a huge selection here.
I can't believe this is the second time we're doing this, and there was, again, no back markers on this race. That nobody finished. I don't think anyone finished having been lapped. But who would you say was your back marker of the race?
So I'm going to, again, be a little creative with my interpretation here. I'm going to give Alex Albon my back marker of the race. He had a very respectable race. It seems like that Williams is just not a good car this year. And while we haven't quite seen Alex sort of drag it up the order the way that we saw George do a lot over the last couple of years, it was a decent race. And there's going to throw an asterisk here. He was involved in a very late collision with Stroll.
Yeah, he didn't finish. You know that, right?
Yeah.
I just want you to know.
I'm being creative with my interpretations here. So from the TV replay, it did seem like a little bit more. If he was pulling off a nice move and Stroll kind of came in on him a little bit. To be fair, I may change my opinion on this if I watch the replay from a couple different angles, but it looks slim pickings today, man. There's not a lot of great options.
Lewis, I'm just saying Lewis Hamilton. He went from 15th to 10th. You know, it was a great race for him, you know? But
you're making fun of me, and you're giving Lewis Hamilton, this 7-time Formula One world champion, back marker of the race?
Yes, I will agree with you for Alex, too, though. I think Alex did have a good showing. I don't know who was at fault. I can't work out who was at fault between him and Lance. I think this might be one of those situations where, like, maybe nobody really played things right there. But I will, in my heart says Lewis just because I'm so proud of him from going from 15 to 10. But this is not realistic. I will probably go again with you, with Alex. I mean, honestly, Lance Stroll probably would have been it, but like Lance was having a pretty decent race, but fell off towards the end. Alex Albon, I think, is definitely filling the George Russell role at Williams right now of getting more out of that car than that car actually has to give. Or maybe Nicholas Latifi is just not very good. And the situation is Williams could be doing more, but they just can't get there.
Yeah, look, 2 races in. This is making a certain Nicholas Latifi look pretty bad. Yeah. It was one thing when Mazepin was around, sort of dragging the rear of the field, and sort of was clear that was sort of way off the pace. I think this season is not showing too kindly on our Canadian friend here.
I was really surprised, honestly, when Williams signed him again, because there are young drivers, right? Yeah, you think it's money?
I think it's money. I mean, of course it's money, right? I mean, I know his dad brings a lot of money to the team.
What sponsors come through Latifi? Do you know?
Don't quote me on this. I think it's the coffee, Lavazza coffee.
Oh, really?
I'm fairly sure that his dad is in the food industry.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure, but I believe that's where the money comes from. Okay. And I'm fairly certain that Latifi brings some pretty heavy sponsorships with his race seat. Maybe don't quote me on the exact details, but I believe that's it.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, Myke, what was your favorite thing of the race? Because there were a lot of moments, and actually much like last week, there was a little bit of a lull toward the middle. It got a little quiet. Nothing was really happening. And then just like last week, we get close to the end and then bam, it all pops off. So what was your favorite moment from the race?
Well, I mean, obviously aside from Lewis, which is just like, that was just like a fun moment for me. The last 10 laps are incredible. It's just, again, I will say I am really enjoying Leclerc versus Verstappen.
Oh, yes,
I am
absolutely.
really enjoying it. It's different in feeling at the moment between Verstappen and Hamilton. Verstappen, Hamilton, I mean, maybe it really kind of led this way. Honestly, it could go this way between Leclerc and Verstappen. Hamilton, Verstappen felt more violent. It felt more explosive. It didn't feel very sportsman-like in a lot of instances between the two of them. There felt like there was some bad blood at certain points. I think as the season went on, it became a little bit like that. At the moment, it definitely feels more sporting between Leclerc and Verstappen. And I'm loving it. I mean, as we stand right now, I would be incredibly happy with Charles Leclerc winning this season. Like, he is becoming just more and more of an exciting driver to watch, and I'm really here for it, big time.
Yeah, I agree. I think the last couple of races, there's been, obviously Ferrari has been incredibly convinced by him for a number of years now, but this is really the first opportunity he's gotten with a true, really, really competitive car, not counting the slightly questionable 2019 Ferrari, which maybe had a couple extra horsepower they weren't supposed to have. Mm-hmm. But I've seen sort of over the last couple of years some sort of questioning of like, is Leclerc really up to the level of someone like Verstappen, right? And I never really quite bought that, but now, especially now that we've seen the proof that he absolutely is, I am completely convinced. I would be thrilled to see Charles. I mean, like, to me, it is really difficult to pick between Max and Charles right now as far as who's sort of the better driver. I think they are in a league of their own in a lot of ways, not only just in the fact that they're in the two best cars, but I think it's hard to argue that they're not the two best drivers on the grid right now. I mean, sure, you can make an argument for Lewis, and you can make an argument that maybe, George...
You have to consider all things, and we can't know what George and Lewis have against them right now because their car's not competitive. I think we've still got to get it halfway through. I genuinely believe halfway through the season, the situation, I said this last time, I still think there's going to be a different... This is why, like, for me as a Mercedes fan right now, I'm like, okay, guys, like, if you keep putting in best of the rest type finishes, it protects you for later on. Because if Mercedes can pull it out to the front, then one of Ferrari or Red Bull is going to be back in best of the rest kind of situation, right? Like in these races. So this is still way too early. Like it's way too early to count anything. We're 2 races into 23 races, right? Like anything can happen. Like last week, no Red Bulls finished at all, right? Like that, any of this stuff can happen. So it's still too early to tell. But yeah, I think right now it's definitely between them. And with where things are sitting right now, and the constructors especially, Ferrari are pulling away 78 points of Mercedes at 38, Red Bull 37.
Yeah. I am happy to see the lack of toxicity. It really does feel like a breath of fresh air. See, not only these two guys who, have a long history together, but really being able to go wheel to wheel every race for the win, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, I will say Colin and Gavin in the live chat pointed out something that I did note, which was, yes, it did seem sporting. However, Max was getting pretty upset in ways that he would get upset at Lewis, right? Of like he's on the radio and he's like, my favorite part is his lights aren't working. Like, why is this? I think the commentators were making fun of him. I think Jensen Button was kind of like, I don't know why he cares. Like, I don't know what he is getting or not getting out of this.
Look, man, I am a fan of Max. I like the way he is super aggressive, and but he comes off a little whiny sometimes. I think would be a good way to put it. A little last week he was, this week just a little bit. He's quick to be jumping on that radio. I'm like, oh no, this, that. Like, I get it, you're in the heat of the moment, but I feel like you don't get that much from Leclerc.
I think this comes from a culture at Red Bull of being this way. And I think, and I don't blame them for this, because they spent so much time as team number 2 or 3, and they had to do everything they could to claw out any type of advantage they could get. And this is something Horner's spoken about a bunch of, like, there are rules and we use everything to our advantage. And I think that they, especially with Lewis last year, got into this, like, anything they could do to get to them. And I genuinely think, too, it also brought some of this out from Mercedes, too, towards the end of the season, of, like, any advantage they could get over each other, whether it's, like, he went too close to this line or he wasn't looking at the flag. Like, I noticed it in Drive to Survive, where Lewis was, like, pointing at the screen and being like, oh, look, you could see the flag lights on, right? Because there was a violation that Max got a penalty for it, and I think it was during a qualifying session when there was a yellow flag and Max didn't slow down or sped up or something, which, again, is illegal, but, like, I think it brings this out in them. And I think, honestly, at the moment, Max is still holding on to this. And Chris is laughing about me saying everything's Christian Horner's fault. I do believe that Christian, as the team principal, creates a culture that the other team, that everyone in the team will believe in. Or I could just say it's Max's fault, like whatever way you want to go. But, like, I do think that it comes from Horner, like, and Max has been pulling from it a little bit.
I mean, look, I feel like we're going to get dangerously into, like, psychologist kind of mode here. But I mean, look, a lot of the drivers on the grid come from very privileged backgrounds. Yeah. And especially when you look at someone, not to single him out, but like Max, right? His dad was a fairly successful Formula One driver. That was really kind of what he was destined to do, right? And he has been at a team for a number of years where not only did he break all these records by, skipping what pretty much every other driver in history has done of going up the ladder. He pretty much went straight from karts, 1 year in F3, then right into Formula One. Won his debut Grand Prix when he moved up from Toro Rosso up to Red Bull. An incredibly talented individual, but also an incredibly talented individual who the team loves, who has had this amazing sort of upbringing with just every advantage that you really could imagine. And he's had that team built around him. So that team is used to doing whatever it is to give Max the absolute best shot, because they think that he's their best hope, right? And none of this is wrong, right? Sure, but it's like, I would never want to blame someone from having a privileged upbringing or anything like that. I mean, look, that's not up to him, like he was born, everything worked. But I also think that sometimes it's worth putting into context where some of these drivers come from and kind of the backgrounds behind it, because there are certainly other people in the field who did not have such advantages and tend not to have so many hissy fits on the radio. So I don't know. I'll take off my psychologist hat real quick for a second. But some of this stuff is just like, well, he kind of sounds like a spoiled rich kid because,
Yep.
That's it.
One final thing I wanted to just spend a minute or two on from the race today was the really great fight between the Alpine drivers early on in the race.
Yes.
That was great. Ocon and Alonso, they really went for it for a while. Otmar was basically saying, we're letting them race. Very nervously saying, we're letting them race.
We're letting them race.
Whatever they want to do. And I think Crofty said on the commentary, like, I mean, it's great for the team because we've been looking at these guys for like 10 minutes now. Like, this is what the sponsors want, And so, the racing like that can actually benefit the team as long as they keep it clean. There were a few moments where it looked like it wasn't going to be kept clean, but ultimately they did, and they called time on it eventually. But that action really was what made it sad for me that Alonso had to pull out of the race because he had a great race.
It was an absolute great race, right? And I mean, again, unreliability sort of randomly hits everyone, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more of it throughout the year. But that was a terrific scrap, and it's nice to see. I feel like Alpine had low expectations going into this year. Certainly for me, I had very low expectations, and part of it I do think is because they have a decent power unit. It seems like Mercedes have taken a step back, so that's sort of just dropped out most of the competition to a sort of a league below them. That being said, though, I think they have a solid driver lineup. It's so great to see after all these years. Alonso, sharp as ever, man. Yep. Absolutely just on top of his game. And Ocon really being able to hold up. I mean, that was super exciting. But, I'm going to 100% sound like a broken record here. Shout out to these cars.
Oh, yeah.
Look at how good this racing has been. Look how good they're following, they're passing. I mean, mind you, at this particular track, there aren't a ton of individual places that you could pass, and the DRS is so powerful. Like, again, I think we're going to get a few more races into this year, and we might start seeing some of those DRS get trimmed, or maybe not.
I don't need this all the time.
Good races.
I don't need this all the time. But I just need it sometimes,
It's great to see, like Max and Charles racing to see who can slow down the most, so who doesn't have to cross the DRS detection zone first.
Yeah, if you can have really 6 laps where the lead is changing each lap, I haven't seen this, in the time that I've been watching the sport. So I am loving it. I'm loving it. And this is actually, we had a few listener questions. Mac wrote in and asked if we could explain what DRS is. We don't have to. I don't think we have to get super technical with this because that's kind of the point. But can you give an explanation of DRS because we mention it a lot?
Absolutely, yeah. DRS, if you are a new Formula One watcher, is a phrase you've probably heard a lot. Basically, it is known as the drag reduction system. So every car has a fairly big rear wing. And, it's very important for, as you're going through the corners to generate maximum downforce, really kind of push the cars down into the ground to give them a lot of grip so they can rip around corners at 170 miles an hour. However, what's not needed is when you're going down the straight, that huge wing that's just sort of slowing the cars down. So a number of years ago, 10 years ago or something like that, Formula One developed the DRS system, really because it was getting very difficult for cars to pass because there's always a slipstream, right? If you're behind a car on the track, they're sort of punching a hole in the air. You're going to have a little bit of an advantage following them. But it was very difficult to pass for quite a while. In fact, it still is even today with DRS. So what the DRS system does is it opens up a flap in the rear wing and gives the car behind a pretty significant speed advantage. Now, DRS is a little different per track. So every track has at least one DRS zone. Some have 2. I believe some tracks have 3 as well.
I think Jeddah has
what happens
3.
is, and I believe Monaco might be the only one with 1. I'd have to double check. But regardless, every track has at least one of these.
Can't overtake at Monaco, so what's the point? Everyone just gets faster for a second and then they carry on.
That's exactly it. But the way DRS works is really simple. So every car, if they are within 1 second of the car in front, so say Max is, 0.8 of a second behind Charles going into the detection zone, which, to be important, that's actually not on the straight. It's always before the corner. So, for example, when we saw Max and Charles kind of go back and forth, they were racing to see who could cross that little DRS detection line second, because whoever crossed that line second, if you're within a 1 second interval of the car in front of you, means that you're going to get the advantage of DRS. So when they came around that last corner, they accelerated that long straight. the car who's behind gets a little sort of beep in their ear. They get to press a button on the steering wheel. And throughout that straightaway, once they hit that zone, they're able to open up a flap in the rear wing, which is going to allow a lot more, or I guess remove a lot of the drag, meaning they're going to get a very large speed advantage, which is why we were seeing these just drive-by passes, just if the car had the DRS and they could just fly by. And that's why we were seeing a lot of the antics between, like we even saw like Lewis and Magnussen kind of going back and forth, and like Lewis passed him at one point, but like obviously he like let him by because he knew he was going to pick up that DRS. It is a very powerful thing. It is something that has a fair bit of criticism as well, because it does make a lot of these passes look easy, right? Just, hey, stay behind someone and then you'll be able to easily catch up with them later on. And, as long as you can be close to them through that detection zone, you're going to get a huge speed advantage.
Yeah, we might be calling
sort of, in a nutshell,
that move the Leclerc, right? Because this was a thing that came out after the race last week where he was letting Max get ahead of him at a certain point in the track, I think going into turn 1 maybe. So he was able to overtake Max again, so he would never let Max get DRS. And Leclerc, I think, is very smart, knew that Max would, at any opportunity, overtake. You give him any opportunity, he's going to go for it. He's going to go for it. And I think we were seeing that and maybe again a little bit today, where like Leclerc did this to him again at one point during the race again, where it was very clear that he pulled back and Max immediately took that point, and then Leclerc got the DRS again to go around him. So DRS is really interesting. I think it levels things out a little bit, which I think makes a lot of sense for it to exist, because otherwise there would be very little overtaking without DRS, I think.
Yeah, and sort of just to go a little deeper into it, there was a thought with these new cars and the new regulations that the DRS wouldn't actually necessarily be necessary. Like maybe it could be phased out. It seems unlikely. Obviously, we're only 2 races in, but it seems unlikely right now that you could just get rid of DRS. And it's tough because, obviously, the best overtakes are the ones where it's not someone flying by doing 30 miles an hour faster, but it's actually proper wheel-to-wheel stuff. But if you imagine if they turned off DRS for a race, it would be, in all likelihood, a much more boring race. And I think that we're missing classic moments, right? It's great to see, Max dive bombing from, a quarter mile behind or something. Like that's fun to see. And to be fair, it's better than nothing, but it's not pure. And so that's what I think a lot of, especially sort of longtime Formula One fans who grew up watching the sport before DRS was a thing, kind of miss the old days. But I think those rose-tinted glasses also kind of help you forget that, oh yeah, remember the days when, Michael Schumacher was 50 seconds ahead of second place? It was a little bit of a different era, and there was certainly a lack of passing back in the day too. It's just, we think about those like crazy overtakes of like, oh my God, it was insane. But that happened like twice a season, so it wasn't as exciting.
Maybe a couple of years into these new cars, as the cars kind of potentially get closer to each other over time, we might not need it, right? Like if they can drive closer to each other and there's less, because there is a potential of some of these, there being more bunches in the field again, like we saw in previous seasons. As a few teams improve, a few teams will slide back down the pecking order. It maybe we wouldn't need DRS as much, but for the time being, I like it. I like that it's there. It adds a bit of drama in.
Absolutely. I think there's also middle grounds here, right? Because it's different at every track, right? So there's a couple of variables. So it's where they have the detection zone, which is one thing. But also they have like a limit of where they actually let you turn on DRS. It's not like as soon as you like hit the straightaway, you can open it up. They have like a line where it's like, maybe it's a quarter of the way down or a third of the way down or something. They can make DRS less powerful just by not letting you use it for quite as long. Because as soon as you hit the brakes, that wing has to close back up, right? So it's only for that straight, but they can only, let you use it for half it or something. So I think there are tools that they can use per track, especially once they have a little bit of a better understanding of how these vehicles work, to soften the approach of DRS. But regardless, it's going to be a thing that you're going to hear about for not only the rest of this year, but probably for several years to come. So that's kind of maybe a long-winded explanation of what the drag reduction system is all about, with those flappy rear wings on the back of all the cars.
If you want to send in any questions to us, maybe there's some we can answer for you. If you're not in the live chat and asking there, you can tweet to us. We are at BackmarkersLive. You can send us some tweets and maybe we could pick some out for future episodes. I appreciated that question from Mac. We do have one more question that I wanted to get to, but it's part of the next race preview. So we're going to Melbourne in 2 weeks, which I'm excited about because I've not seen an Australian Grand Prix in the last 2 years. So I've never seen the Melbourne race. It's going to be intriguing for me from a time in the morning standpoint, which I'm going to be more on your level of what time the races start. But yeah, I'm really excited about the Australian Grand Prix.
Absolutely. So we're going to take off next week. So there's no race for next weekend. But the following week, we will be live down under. And I'll say, obviously, there's a little bit of a history here. So we did not go to Australia in 2021. And technically, there was no race in 2020, although that was literally like the night before whatever when, it got shut down due to COVID. And obviously, that was a huge, huge thing. A big part of Drive to Survive, if you watch that season. But regardless,
great episode.
It is a very fun track.
That one. Really, really good episode of Drive to Survive.
I was during all the Saudi should we cancel the race kind of drama. I was thinking about Lewis's like money talks kind of line a lot. Like
cash is king, I think is the
cash is king.
He used that twice. Yeah. He also used that at Spa with the rainy Spa. He said cash is king there too.
Yeah. Complicated, but regardless, Melbourne I think it's got a reputation of not being the most exciting track on the calendar. For me, who has driven around it dozens of times in the Formula One games, I think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's my only experience with it is driving it in the F1 PlayStation game.
Well, what will be interesting is actually this is the first time that we're going to Melbourne with the new layout. So I don't remember if it was in the end of 2018 or whatever, but regardless, the current cars have never raced at this configuration. So they've tweaked some of the corners, they've kind of opened it up, again, to kind of help promote better racing. So we'll see. I'm hopeful it'll be a pretty entertaining race. It's certainly a fun track to watch. But if you're listening to us live or watching us live, keep in mind that because we are racing in Australia, it is going to be at probably the wackiest time of the year. So definitely check with the F1 site or just your local calendar. I'll say if you're on the U.S. West Coast, I believe it's like 10 or 11 o'clock at night on Saturday, which is very strange.
Yeah, consider that as a different day for you.
It is, it's my Saturday night race, which is NASCAR, I guess.
Yeah, it's super early in the morning here. I think the race kicks off at 6 a.m. UK time. So
you can feel my pain because most of the European races are 6 a.m. for me.
Yeah.
So
I've done it once when we were in Hawaii last year on vacation. There was one of the, I actually think it was Jeddah. I think it was Saudi Arabia, and it was just like super weird time, like very, very, very early in the morning. Wendell asked, Mercedes is said to be bringing some upgrades for the Australian Grand Prix. Would it make enough of a difference to bring them back to the front?
I mean, there's no way of knowing, like zero way of knowing. I mean, they could have an entirely new car, right? I mean, we don't know. But I think we could take an educated guess. And my educated guess is no. I think Mercedes are too far back. I think they're battling on a bunch of fronts. So the thing is, for context, when we started the last era, the turbo hybrid era in 2014, Mercedes started out with a huge advantage because they had a great power unit. They were kind of put everyone else on the back foot. And then they sort of capitalized on that and they held their advantage throughout the entire 7, 8, 9-year run, right? I don't think that that's necessarily what's going to happen. Right? I don't think Mercedes are behind now, but it's easy for these things to snowball, right? So the issues that Mercedes have, number one, their car is porpoising, which is a whole thing onto its own. But long story short, the cars are bouncing up and down on the straight because they have this thing called ground effect, which is sort of a suction to hold the car down to the ground. But because they have to run these cars so low and so stiff that when that suction comes undone, the car bounces up and then sucks down and bounces up and sucks down. A lot of cars, most of the cars on the grid are sort of suffering from this, but Mercedes certainly are one of the worst cars to have to deal with it. And that just makes the cars slow and it makes the cars less confidence inspiring. If you're George Russell and you're blasting into a corner at 170 miles an hour, you might think twice about going super late when your car's like, oh, not good, right? So that's one of the issues they're running with. The other issue is the power unit. Everyone's being a little cautious. Everyone's like, oh, well, we have to wait and see. Look, I'm going to say Mercedes have a real power unit deficiency compared to the rest of the field. I don't know what happened. I don't know if it's the fuel. I don't know if something is wrong with that Mercedes power unit from a power perspective. It is not a coincidence that 2 races in a row, we see nothing but Mercedes cars on the bottom of the order for their qualifying, not doing well in the races. I think that they have 2 issues to work with. And my concern for Mercedes is that while they obviously have an incredibly sort of talented team that they're, clearly have this, amazing run of constructors championships over the last 8 years or 9 years or whatever. The problem is that with the budget cap in place, which is the same amount of money that all the teams have, or at least they can spend up to that number, it's like 140 or 145 million. It's a lot less than Mercedes used to have to work with. Same thing with like Ferrari. And because of that, Mercedes now are dealing with not the unlimited piles of cash they used to be able to quickly catch up. And they're fighting a sort of battle on multiple fronts to try to recover performance from their power unit and to get on top of the design of their car. Guess what? By the time they even put a dent in a lot of that issue, Red Bull and Ferrari could be a half second up the road because they've, found all these new aero bits because they're not wasting their time trying to get on top of a basic issue.
Well, similarly, though, issues can occur throughout the season. New ones.
Very true.
And also improvements can go backwards. We've seen this a bunch of times. We make some improvements to the car. That wasn't right. We revert. Now it's even more wrong. Like, this is the kind of stuff you can see, right? I would say the one, I think, ray of hope for me is during qualifying, very frequently, either George or Lewis will hit either a purple or they will be on time, right, in a sector. Because what it seems like they're struggling with is the straight line speed, which is potentially more of a porpoising problem. The porpoising seems easier to fix than if they have significant power unit disadvantages, right? Like, it's unclear, right? Because you say, I agree with you, right? There is clearly a power unit problem, but they are performing vastly better than the other cars with Mercedes power units. So it's difficult.
It's difficult to say, and again, I
do not think Mercedes are going to win the championship. I just want to say that I do not at this point. I do not think that's going to happen. But I do believe that by halfway through the season, they're going to be back. I think back in contention again.
We'll see. I would love to see it. A three-way fight for the championship, or even three-way fights for the race would be incredible. Yeah. But I think if you're a Mercedes fan, you better pull your underwear up, tighten your belt. Put your bathrobe on. I'm not really sure why I've got a lot of weird metaphors here.
That you're making me put on here? I'm pulling
Prepare yourself.
my underwear up, tightening my belt. Where is the belt? And then putting on my bathrobe. That's what I need to do? Interesting.
That's what you're doing.
Right, I'll work on that for next week. It's going to be an early race. Maybe I'll still be in my bathrobe. For me, I'm just hoping we get to the end of the season, we get some Mercedes wins, and then we go into next season. And for me, I'm like, okay, cool. I've come to accept this. I'm taking every positive as this is great, this has happened. And now I'm putting everything in my mind behind Charles Leclerc. That's where I am now.
Okay. I know we already made our predictions last time, but I think Ferrari and Charles are looking good. But keep in mind, we're 2 races into a 23-race season.
Yep.
A lot can and will happen. I would be very surprised if it's not Red Bull and Ferrari at 1 and 2 in one of those orders. I think that seems pretty safe right now, but it's very early. It's hard to say. So let's get a few more races in.
Out Mercedes. I feel like I can't count them out. Who knows, right? It's just saying we are 2 races in. And really not just we are 2 weeks in. That's even more of a thing, right? Because we've got 2 weeks now. Right now, in a week, they have made some changes, and especially George performed much better in qualifying, right, than he did the week before. Mm-hmm. And also, I think, had a pretty successful race. George was racing on his own. He was far from who was in front of him. He was far ahead of who was behind him, right? Where Alpine were way more competitive against Mercedes last week than they were this week. So, yeah, we'll find. It's going to be interesting to see. So I will say I am really excited for Melbourne because it's going to be something new, and also who knows where we're going to be in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, well, I know where we'll be. Right here recording the next episode of The Backmarkers.
So don't forget, you can catch us recording live on our YouTube channel. The easiest way to get there is to go to backmarkers.live. You can also search for The Backmarkers on YouTube. I got us our vanity URL on YouTube, by the way, and we are unfortunately could not get Backmarkers, so we are /The Backmarkers on YouTube. But at least that makes it easier to find us. But backmarkers.live is the easiest way. If you can't catch the video version, you need the audio version. We are also at relay.fm/backmarkers. You can whichever way you want. And don't forget forget to come follow us on Twitter. Send in your questions at BackmarkersLive. Austin is at Austin, not Duncan. I am at Myke, IMYKE. And thank you so much for checking out this second episode here at the Backmarkers. I cannot wait to talk about the rest of the season with you, Austin. And thank you all for watching and or listening. And we'll be back in 2 weeks' time.
Vroom, 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 vroom. We need to get a sound effects budget, I think.
I mean,
actually.
I can do them, but why would I when you're so good at them?